It looked pretty awkward initially, but considering that there are next to no games that allow directional attacks with your weapons and blocks,
Steel beast!
well, here's the other one. Okay, so you'll want to know what in the world is this that I'm showing here? Well, it's Die by the Sword, a third-person action game developed by Treyarch and released by Interplay. Yes, that Treyarch and that Interplay. Scouring through the game's credits, those familiar with 90s games will recognize plenty of names, many of them well respected. Like, look at some of the games these people worked on: Fallout 1 and 2, Baldur's Gate, Carmageddon, Icewind Dale, but you most likely never heard of Die by the Sword, and I don't blame you. Despite the reputation of those involved, the game sold abysmally, and I have a deep nostalgic admiration for it. Before the juicy parts, how did I get it to work? Well, before it got listed on GOG, the only way it would run satisfyingly was to use the Die by the Sword extended mod developed by some German guy and published on his own website and forum. Yeah, this is where we spent our time after collectively deciding that IRC servers are for old farts. Anyway, this mod not only offered compatibility with modern systems, but it also came with some neat features like mod support and the like. You might notice that some of the footage will look less smooth, and there is good reason for it. You see, I've used my ancient copy of the mod before realizing that its latest update unlocked the frame rate alongside some other new features. You won't see it, but the game was initially capped at the very cinematic 18 frames per second. Still 17 more than your eyes can see, kids. If you think this is a pain in the ass, just so you know that another game that I intended to cover required installing it on a virtual machine instance of Windows 95 if I wanted to see anything beyond the massive graphical artifacts. Just guess how much enthusiasm I had about getting to those lengths. This is the sort of game where playing the tutorial is actually necessary, not because it shows you the janky physics, movement, or the terrible camera system. I'll get to those a bit later. You see, the main attraction is the control system for combat, which had so much effort put into it that it's even got a fancy name and everything. The so-called V-Sim gives you complete control of your weapon swings, meaning you can put your sword, axe or whatever you're using as a weapon anywhere with as much strength as you want with your mouse. The tutorial even hypes it up.
While arcade mode is serviceable, you should try VSIM control with the mouse, joystick or keyboard. You will find its precision far surpasses the clumsy arcade mode.
I know what's coming, you're not fooling me, game. Those more perceptive will most likely have alarm bells ringing in their heads right now when I mentioned controlling the weapon with your mouse. You are correct. You can't use the mouse to look around. Remember the days of booting Quake or Doom for the first time and having the default controls use turn left or turn right instead of strafe? I hope you remember them well, because here you have no other way of turning your character except of using the keyboard. God, I feel old already. The other half of the equation is the physics involved. That's because beyond the overall health, each character can be torn limb from limb. You can amputate arms and leave your opponents helpless, or straight up decapitate them for a quick finish. Weapons are blocked by other weapons or armor, and good aim has to circumvent them. Last but not least, the momentum of your strikes matter a lot. So not only do you need to swing your mouse as fast as possible, but even your character movement can help deal a lot of damage. All this makes for a system with a reasonably high skill ceiling. Does it work? Well, the game's main story isn't something to write home about. You're playing as the knight Enric enjoying his evening with his lover Maya before some kobolds kidnap her. That's basically the whole story. Enric is going deeper and deeper into the caverns, fighting all sorts of monsters to save his damsel in distress. The first level is spent inside some caverns where you mostly fight kobolds alongside some orcs. The kobolds are, in theory, good target practice to get the hang of controlling your swings. Nevertheless, these fuckers are so tiny and jump all over the place, making them almost impossible to hit sometimes. But in fairness, when you do hit them, you're likely to tear them off or outright kill them. The level itself is short but packed with some neat surprises. For instance, in the third room you find yourself caught in a rope trap just as you enter it and get ambushed by an orc and a kobold. So you either swing like a maniac at your attackers or cut the rope with your own sword to free yourself quickly. But if you think these cramped tunnels were hard to see or navigate, you don't want to know what's coming later. The last section here is a small dock where another orc and 2 kobolds attack you. A trend where each room throws progressively more enemies at you becomes noticeable, and is something the game does well throughout all of its levels. The second level is alongside an underground river. The raft you're on is attacked by a trog, which is this green thing. They're nasty, but since they have no swords or shields, they won't block any of your hits, fortunately. This level isn't extraordinary beyond showing you a glimpse of some of the secrets you're expected to find later, with a good old behind the waterfall trick. But here the issues with the camera and controls start showing their teeth. And no, they won't go away. The third level is actually one of the most interesting of the bunch. After cleaning out the orc and 2 kobolds waiting for you at the elevator and the next 2 orcs alongside the supply cart tracks, you reach the punishment room. What is the punishment room, you might ask? Apparently it's the place where misbehaving kobolds are strung up on ropes and tortured by orcs. In reality, it's the place where these 2 orcs smack you all around with their axes as if they're beefed up versions of what you previously encountered. Oh, and if you're a good man and free this kobold, he'll bring you a healing potion. How nice of him. After cleaning some other rooms of orcs and these new insects called mantises, you're thrown into another of the game's tricks. You get to drink a shrinking potion and crawl through these tiny tunnels in search of an exit. Look, I think it's time to shit on the game's camera for a moment. You have the option to keep the camera fixed either right behind you or raised slightly above. Both options are poor in their own way. The first one is too low and you can barely see something in front of you, while the other solves this problem but makes it very hard to aim your sword. And they both suffer from getting stuck into walls, making fights even more complicated if having no mouse look wasn't enough. Speaking of mouse look, the developers realized this would be an issue, so they added this nifty scout camera mode, which is useless. Not only do you have to press a button to access it and a separate button to revert to the regular camera, but you can't move while using it, and to make it worse, you don't even have a 360-degree control of the camera. It was meant as a way to help you find your way when platforming, but to its credit, the level design is good enough to make the direction you need to take more or less easy to assess. But why did I mention the camera controls right when I was discussing small tunnels? Well, it's because this section is really awful to traverse. Tight corridors before were already hard to navigate, but these take the cake. You can barely see the direction you're going to, which is compounded by the camera going all over the place. Oh, and to make matters better, all this is set up as a labyrinth, yay! On the flip side, fighting kobolds larger than you is a bit amusing. The following level opens up with what seems to be a sacrificial ritual performed by an orc shaman on your lover Maya. What follows is a bit of a pain in the ass. This is because, on one hand, healing items become rarer and rarer. In contrast, the enemies become very strong and more numerous. This level in particular has you go from one room filled with orcs to another, and it's at this point where the game really slaps you around. When you finally arrive at the altar, you see Maya teleported away and a mysterious figure thanking his minions for his delivery.
You have done well, my servants. I am pleased with your latest offering.
Wait, this can't be right. Is it Holy shit, it's Tony J! Yeah, this game still has some surprises up its sleeves, it seems. Looking at the casting credits, you can also see Brian Cummings and Jennifer Hale in the roles of Enric and Maya. Anyway, this altar room is a fucking chore to get through. The orc shaman just spams fireballs at you and you can barely dodge them because of just how clunky the movement is. After way too many attempts, your reward from the shaman's corpse is a potion that transforms you into the orc shaman himself. Thank goodness for that, because you get to walk back into rooms teeming with orcs and ogres that won't fight you since they're fooled by your disguise. Considering how hard your ass got kicked already, being spared of even more brutal fights is an unexpected token of generosity. What follows is a level consisting almost exclusively of platforming and puzzles. I already dissed the control scheme, but there's something to be said about the platforming itself. You can theoretically grab ledges even in mid-air, but yes, theoretically was used for a reason. The combination of camera placement and iffy physics make navigating more complicated than it needed to be. And before you say, but it was 1998, games weren't good at that, may I remind you that Tomb Raider has been doing it way better for 2 years and 3 installments by this point in time. Even a hardcore gamer from 1998 would have found this platforming lacking. The next level is inside some dwarven mines. The dwarves themselves are a bit of a pain in the ass to fight because they have weapons in both hands, so your swings get blocked relatively easily because of it. Otherwise, the level's only distinct feature is the machine you need to destroy after a bit of back and forth before proceeding further. The penultimate level is this eerie castle. Its main features are lots of skeletons and even more skeletons. I wouldn't say they're as tough as other enemies, but their shields can block a lot of hits, and if you don't strike low enough to avoid them, you won't be able to hit them. By this point, it's pretty obvious that the game ran out of surprises. The end goal is to reach the wizard's study, but you must destroy all 3 crystals that power him before, unless you want to be instantly killed when you finally meet him. After doing all that and foiling his last trap, you have a final confrontation. Let's see, mandatory platforming while dodging insta-kill ranged attacks, followed by not actually fighting him but instead hitting the crystal that traps Maya, only for it to blow up and knock you on your ass, making you vulnerable to the aforementioned ranged attacks. What's not to love? After saving Maya, you get the classic the hero gets the girl ending. Hooray! I wouldn't say that the single player campaign is anything exceptional, but at least it tries to do some exciting things in its first half. The expansion called Limb from Limb comes with its own campaign, but considering it starts with this high difficulty and lots of puzzles, I'm definitely not curious to see how it goes. At least you get to choose between multiple characters, but unfortunately only Enric and Maya get to have voice lines. I mean, I said you get to hear Jennifer Hale, but she does this terrible Scottish accent that I'm not sure that it's necessarily a plus.
Out of my way or die! You fool!
Not her finest work, I have to say, but I ain't judging. Everybody's gotta start from somewhere after all. You also have the opportunity to create custom fights against the AI using any of the characters you wish to fight as. In tournaments, you get to fight against progressively more challenging opponents similar to Mortal Kombat's system. It's sort of fun, even if sometimes I get the impression that some encounters are repeated as if to pad the experience. The other way to fight opponents is the arenas, where you get to create encounters to your heart's content or even set up multiplayer games. The latter, of course, is next to impossible unless you convince some other person to install the game, but against the AI you have plenty of options, including mixed team fights and several game modes. But the experience suffers again due to the weird controls and the janky camera. I wish I enjoyed my time with Die by the Sword and claimed to have discovered a hidden gem lost in time by the ignorant masses, but I can't. For every spectacular beheading or devastating blow landed on your victims, you have dozens of moments that you fight against the game's absolutely clunky control scheme. I can't even say that it was way before its time. The concept is unmistakably ambitious, but its implementation leaves much to be desired. Even something minor as having a pointer showing you your mouse position would be helpful. There have been plenty of moments where your camera's perspective made it impossible to know where I was holding my sword. Thus I was left confused whenever I was missing my swings that to me looked like connecting, and compounded with things like having no mouse look or being forced to steer your character as if it's a shipping barge makes for a frustrating and confusing experience in combat. I mentioned at the start of the video that it sold abysmally. I know this because this old CNET article where Alan Pavlish admits to selling less than 29,000 copies. And he is correct, the game's control scheme is its downfall, especially since apparently only using a good old-fashioned joystick might have made the experience bearable. I admit I wasn't curious enough to test if the game can recognize a modern gamepad after seeing that it doesn't register more than 3 mouse buttons. There are instances where compatibility between decades-old software and modern hardware isn't as exciting as it may sound. Regardless of that, in 1998 expecting people to use a joystick to properly enjoy your game was a tall order on PC. Do I recommend it? Well, it's $10 on GOG, and as much nostalgia I have for it, I don't feel it's worth for the price. You can find plenty more functioning and less frustrating experiences for that money. But if you want the most complex and close to realism combat system there is, this is it with all of its flaws. Thanks for tagging along in this janky nostalgia trip. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and share it with other like-minded fellows. And until next time, cheers!